if you've left us a review.
BBC 5 Live.
Well, hello and welcome to another Bespoke Weekly. My name's OJ Borge. Thank you so much for downloading this podcast. Thank you as well if you subscribed, and especially if you've left us a review. Here are some of the ones in front of me right now. This one from Smiler998. I like it. Good to have a weekly cycling podcast and less fussy than some of the others. Kate and Kay says, as a relatively new cyclist and fan, I love this podcast and the breadth it covers. Makes me want to cycle more, which is the whole point of this podcast. All about the joy of cycling. And this week, of course, we'll have to touch briefly on the story surrounding Chris Froome and what's happened since last week. We'll also talk about the sad passing of Sharon Laws and her place in the cycling world. And we're also going to talk about the local bike shop in the internet age, which is where we are right now.
You got me spinning around, can't tell up from down, got me crying out loud.
So here we are, welcome along to Bespoke Weekly. After last week wanting to be in a bike shop and being ambushed by the Chris Froome Team Sky story, this week we have made it to the bike shop. We're in the back room, if I paint the picture for you. We're surrounded by shoes on the wall, there's wheels hung up, there's tyres on offer and bikes all around us, both e-bikes and urban bikes and a couple of single speeds as well. And just so you know, the shop is open right now, so you might hear customers coming in and out. And later on in this podcast, we are going to talk about the role of the bike shop, memories of the bike shops of us growing up, and where the local bike shop, the LBS, is now in the world of the internet. Alongside me, as always, is Rob Hales, who looks fresh, and Tom Fordyce, who looks fresh, but after Sports Personality of the Year, you weren't so fresh for a couple of days.
No, I mean, I think it was a 5 a.m. finish, which I thought was quite impressive.
That's good going.
Yeah, I think so. I got woken up in the hotel by the cleaner ramming the Hoover against the door, which is always a sign that you've possibly missed the...
What, trying to get out?
Yeah.
Give us an anecdote from Sports Personality, because I missed it. Rob, you went, of course, but I think you were driving home.
I was driving home, yes,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I didn't drink.
I was in the land of cycling. I was in Copenhagen.
But I did have a beer very early on in the evening, and then when I went back, I got charged for my next round. Unbeknown to me, the alcohol was free, yet the soft drink that I was on, I had to pay for. What's that all about?
I don't know. Somebody write to Lord Reith immediately. So give us an anecdote from the night.
So Spotty's all about the strange juxtaposition, OJ, of disparate sports people, some of whom are letting their hair down properly and don't get the chance to let their hair down for the rest of the year, so are really going to town in style. But the favourite little vignette for me involves Harry Kane's brother. So Harry Kane was one of the nominees and was there, and then he hot-tailed it at the sort of time you'd expect a professional footballer to hot-tail it. But his brother, who looks exactly like Harry Kane, didn't hot-tail it, and then was walking around the dance floor, getting massive props for his goal scoring for Spurs in England.
Spending all night getting selfies?
Yeah, and was at no point saying to people, yeah, I'm actually his brother.
So before we get into talking about bike shops and also talking about Sharon Laws, who passed away this week, we do have to touch on the Team Sky Chris Froome story. Now, if you missed it, well, where have you been for the past week? If you have, then Chris Froome at the Vuelta this year, stage 17?
18.
Stage 18. He was found with 2,000 nanograms of salbutamol, which is an asthma drug, in a urine test. What has happened since then? Well, let's go through some of the feedback we've had online after we did last week's podcast. How have you found it?
So it usually gets split down the middle. You'll get people who are accusing you of going in too hard, and people who will accuse you of being an apologist. You get some nice ones down the middle as well. I'm going to read you my favourite ones. Sometimes they're just a bit random. So this was in reply to the feature that I posted on Twitter, on the BBC Sport website, from Heathy49. Why don't you just go and crawl back under the rock from where you obviously called from? So that's what. And my response to him was, hi, you only need one from in that sentence. The second one is currently grammatically superfluous.
Well, Mark Livesey, who's a competitive triathlete, he tweeted this at me after the show. A very disappointing podcast about Chris Froome's excessive salbutamol finding from OJ Borge at Bespoke Weekly. Linguistic subterfuge and reframing at its very best. People might think you had something to hide. And he's found me out. He has, because I have signed for Team Sky. No one knew I'm their key grimper for 2018.
You're giving it away now.
Did anyone get called a slithering reptile this week?
None of us, but I think somebody pointed that in the direction of Chris Froome himself.
Yeah. Does anyone want to pick up on that? Because it was Kath Wiggins, who posted this on Facebook.
Well, there's a bit of history, isn't there, between Kath Wiggins and Michelle Froome. It's a little bit unedifying. It's not the best thing for cycling, and this is one of these things. You know, they used to say, don't call people, don't call your girlfriend if you're a new girlfriend when you've had a few drinks. It's a bit like that with social media, isn't it? If you're feeling a bit emotional, if you've had a couple of drinks, just leave it alone. Just
a couple of things that have come from the cycling world since this was all released in a Guardian exclusive. Tony Martin, who is the world time trial champion. He's not, is he? No,
not currently.
Not currently.
No. Several times.
He's one of the great time trialists. He says something along the lines of the handling of the Chris Froome adverse drug test by cycling authorities is a scandal and a double standard is being applied. He's had to row back on this since, hasn't he?
So he actually got a phone call from the UCI just to Entschuldigung, Tony, just to clarify the actual rules. And to be fair to him, he has held his hand up and said, OK, I got this wrong. Which is quite refreshing.
Pat McQuaid, who is the ex-head of the UCI, Chris Froome's adverse drugs test is a disaster for cycling that could lose Team Sky all its credibility. And Brian Cookson, who is also ex-UCI, he was made apparently aware of the 4-time Tour de France champion Chris Froome's adverse analytical finding, which is what it is in his final hours in office as head of cycling's governing body. The former British cycling president and member of Team Sky's supervisory board had on Thursday said he had no role or influence in how Froome's case or that of any other rider had been handled.
Yeah, well, a little bit of balance for you about Pat McQuaid. Let's not forget that when Pat McQuaid was in charge of the UCI, and certainly when his predecessor Hein Verbruggen was in charge, they were criticised strongly by the Cycling Independent Reform Commission for their handling of anti-doping efforts under their watch, particularly relating to Lance Armstrong. So yeah, he probably has got a point, but we need a little bit of balance there as well.
I think as well with Brian Cookson now not being president of the UCI, I think in that respect he's probably dodged a bullet in terms of let's just look down in a few weeks, in a few months, maybe in a year or two, who knows, if Chris Froome and Team Sky get let off because they can basically prove that he is innocent and that he hasn't taken more than the allowable. Just imagine that if Brian Cookson, a British man, was head of the UCI, can you imagine the backlash that would come from that? I mean, as it is, we've got Lepartien, the Frenchman, who is in. So in that respect, I think he's certainly dodged a bullet, and he's probably glad that he's not now head of UCI.
It's worth pointing out that when we recorded the podcast last week, the story had only just broken. I mean, I was still slightly confused by the whole story at the time because I had been woken up by 5 Live. I was having a lovely dream. I'd been called by the Breakfast Show and asked to comment on it.
What was the dream
about? I can't remember.
Probably
at the time. Yeah, probably. But I'd woken up by a strong Irish accent in my ear saying, "Can you come on the Breakfast Show and talk about it?" And at the time, I didn't see much in this Sky story. But since then, since it's steamrolled and it's snowballed and it's got bigger, a week later, are we any clear on what's happening?
Yeah, we're in that strange limbo, OJ, you get with cases like this where the facts have come out and now Chris Froome and Sky will be trying to replicate at some stage in a lab the conditions that he was experiencing on stage 7 of the Vuelta to try and show that by having taken the legal amount of salbutamol through an inhaler, he could return such an extraordinary number. Going back to Spotty, we were talking about earlier, Chris Froome was obviously one of the nominees, and it was quite interesting not only watching his interview on the night, but also the way it affected the voting figures. So I think before the story broke last week, he was third favourite behind Anthony Joshua and Lewis Hamilton. He then these odds went out to 50 to 1, something crazy. He finished 7th, which you would think is the public giving their view on his case. He got 47,600 votes. Now, that was quite a lot more than Harry Kane. Harry Kane got 18,000. So you can look at this two ways. You can either say the British public have voted there and said, look, we don't trust this man and we don't like him. Or you could say, well, you'd almost expect him, if that was the case, to get almost no votes at all. He got more than 50% of the votes of Mo Farah, who was the surprise winner. I found that quite interesting because it's been very black and white, hasn't it, this discussion? We've all seen it on social media, the reaction to the show we did last week. It suggests to me that there is a lot of confusion out there, that people actually, there are people who are totally convinced that Chris Froome is a dope cheat, and there are people who are totally convinced that he's innocent. But there is also a lot of people who just don't know.
Well, you mentioned Spotty. For the first time ever, I think, somebody who was up for the Sports Personality of the Year was actually quizzed about what was going on in the news at that moment. So this is Chris Froome talking at this year's Sports Personality of the Year.
And obviously, Chris, we heard news this week about an adverse finding from one of your urine samples from the Tour of Spain. You were over the threshold for the asthma medication. What is your take on that and the concern that it's caused?
Listen, I mean, I do completely get it. I understand the concerns. I've been a bike rider now for 10 years, and I know how some people might look at our sport. And that's a responsibility that I take really seriously. I am an asthmatic. I have been since I was a child, and I use a puffer to help me manage my asthma. But I've never taken more puffs than I'm allowed. So this really is quite a horrible situation, if I'm honest. And we're working as hard as we can to try and get down to the bottom of this.
And what happens next for you, Chris?
So we're currently on a training camp in Spain at the moment. Looking forward to getting home and being with the family next week for Christmas. Before getting stuck into training for next year's Giro d'Italia is going to be my first goal. That's the Tour of Italy in May. Before focusing on being ready again for the biggest challenge of next year, which will be trying to win the Tour de France for a 5th time. I mean, that would just be an absolute dream come true for me.
Yeah, not planning to take it easy anytime soon. Thank you so much for talking to us, Chris.
Thanks.
So that's Chris Froome there, who was speaking at the Sports Personality of the Year. There's one thing I want to pick up on, and that is The Guardian, who broke the story originally. If you read a couple of their columnists, of their journalists, they are referring to this as a failed drugs test. Now, I was reading a story by William Fotheringham, who is their cycling correspondent. He doesn't use that. He uses the phrase adverse analytical finding. Why are certain publications, certain writers using the phrase failed drugs test?
Because adverse analytical positive is a horrible mouthful and doesn't make sense to a lot of people. But that's what it is. That's technically what it is. The next stage is that it would become an anti-doping violation. And that's the point where I think you would officially call it a failed drug test. It's a sort of easy shortcut to saying that it's not technically exactly accurate.
The Guardian's Richard Williams wrote this in a column this week. He writes about cycling every now and again. And this was the end of his column. It said, talking about Team Sky, perhaps their job is done. Rob, would professional cycling be better off right now, at this moment, as we speak, without Team Sky?
No, I don't think so, because there would, if you look at it in terms of job employment, that's an awful lot of people out of work. So in that respect, no, not at all. Again, I think it comes down to the whole subject of the Chris Froome. There'd be an awful lot of people who would be very saddened, deeply saddened by it, because there is an awful lot of love for Team Sky. At the same time, there's an awful lot of people out there who don't like Team Sky for whatever reason. They would certainly be happy. I think it would be interesting to see who they would then hate and who the fans of Team Sky would then turn to fall in love with and follow in huge respect. And obviously, is it Team Sky or is it the individual riders? Obviously a lot of people from Great Britain like them because of the fact they're a British team and they have an awful lot of the top riders from Britain on the road. Should Team Sky not be here? No, I don't think so.
Because it's looking shaky with this going on, with all of the Wiggins, TUE, Fancy Bears hack, and in business news, which we don't often focus on, the fact that Rupert Murdoch has sold to Disney all of 21st Century Fox, or just part of it? He sold all of it, isn't he, to 21st Century Fox?
Right, so this is where it gets slightly complicated. He's sold, or they are hoping to sell the whole of 21st Century Fox. The Murdoch family has currently got a 39% stake in Sky, and they are trying to buy the whole of Sky. There's probably going to be 18 months of scrutiny about whether they're allowed to, because it's been referred by Culture Secretary Karen Bradley to the Competition and Markets Authority. The most important man in this, OJ, is James Murdoch, Rupert Murdoch's son, who is chief executive of 21st Century Fox, who is chairman of Sky. He's the cycling lover who was the main driver behind the initial sponsorship of Team Sky and has always stood by Dave Brailsford and all this.
It's how it normally works, isn't it? The mechanics of a sponsor, they
Yeah.
They love cycling generally.
So at the moment, look, Disney are a very, very safe company. It may be that they want to get rid of Fox News if the takeover goes through because they don't. They keep things very safe. They don't like political things. If you wanted to have some fun with it, there would be people out there who would say that if Disney do take over Sky, well, the way Team Sky have been run recently, they've shown themselves to be something of a Mickey Mouse outfit already. I certainly couldn't comment. But it is an additional worry for the team at the moment, and that's at the very high level. If it is decided that this is negative for Sky, the brand, then the cycling team will get drop sharpish.
5 Live Sports, the EuroLeague's podcast.
Hello, I'm Mina Rizuki, and I just wanted to tell you about the EuroLeague's football show, which I present alongside Rafa Honigstein.
Hello.
James Horncastle.
G'day.
And Julian Laurent.
Hello.
We bring you the very best analysis and conversation from Europe's best leagues. So I'm going to say 3 names. Shout out the first word that comes into your head. Neymar.
Paris.
Hair.
Traitor. Oh my God.
Peter Bosch.
Board genius. Flop.
Kamikaze.
Italy not making the World Cup. Outrageous.
Ventura! Blues.
Finally.
Finally.
Which of us is the most emotionally invested in our own teams?
Julien Laurent, every day of the week.
Me. I'm not sure.
It's got to be.
Don't know what they're talking about.
So plenty of that and more in the EuroLeague's football show. Available to download every Monday or Tuesday from the 5 Live website and your usual podcast providers.
The EuroLeague's podcast from 5 Live Sports.
On to some sad news now that came out from the cycling world, and that's the former Great Britain cyclist Sharon Laws, who's died aged 43. She was diagnosed with cervical cancer in October of 2016. If you've not heard of her, she was the British road race champion in 2012. She was a professional racer for almost a decade. She helped Nicole Cook to that Olympic gold in 2008. Now, someone who knew her was Laura Winter, who's a cycling presenter. And Laura, you knew her well. You rode with her.
I did, not competitively, I hasten to add. I rode with Sharon this year when she was undergoing treatment back in the Cotswolds, where we both hail from. And even with chemo and with cancer, she was still dropping me on the hills. She was a phenomenal bike rider, and it was genuinely a privilege to have ridden with her.
What does she do for the cycling community? Not just for women's cycling, but for cycling in general?
She came to cycling late on in life. So I think she gives all of those who are still racing and trying to make it age 30 a bit of hope, firstly. But Sharon seemed to touch so many lives. You can see that by the number of tributes we've had, that not just from her teammates and who she raced against in the peloton, but also from some of the male cyclists as well, who have just basically come back with the same sort of thing. Alex Dowsett tweeted she was a barrel of laughs. Dan Lloyd tweeted that, and something that made me laugh because it totally encapsulates Sharon and her energy and her endless amount of enthusiasm for life and for exercise, that he would come down to breakfast bleary-eyed on training camps and she'd already be in the pool swimming 20 lengths, and then she'd get on the bike and do a full day training. She was like that. She was just up with the larks, up as early as she could. She'd do yoga, then she'd go for a swim, then she'd ride her bike. When we did our Tuesday club rides, we generally tend to do around 100k, relatively hilly, and then she'd come home, do another loop on some of the really hilly roads around where we live, and then go down to the local swimming pool and swim 5k, and that would be her Tuesday. Just endless amounts of energy, despite the fact that she was fighting this brutal disease that would go on to take her life.
What legacy do you think she leaves?
I think, certainly personally for me, Sharon leaving us far too soon reminds you that life is too short and that you've got to do what you want to do now and you've got to go for it. She makes you want to be a better person as well. Sharon was so lovely, so wonderful, but also a real fighter, and she had this dogged determination that, okay, it wouldn't have beaten cancer, but she fought for 1.5 years to try and be the absolute best she could be in that time, and she made the most of every single second of the life she had, even though she was having chemotherapy. She was on her bike 4 weeks ago, and now she's no longer with us. It's really difficult to get your head around, but I think Sharon's death and the legacy she leaves is clear from the outpouring of love for her, that though she had a short life, she has touched so many lives, and she just makes you want to be a better person, and she makes you want to do more than you thought you could.
That's Laura C. Winter there of Vox Women. And Rob, you knew Sharon, didn't you?
I did. I mean, we were on the same team together, 2008. I was obviously on the men's team with Halfords, and that was when Sharon really first came to the UK. But for about 6 months or so, she lived not far from me, just down in the next village, so I see her quite often. But, you know, these things, they're shocking, aren't they? Far too young, the lifestyle that Sharon led. But, you know, you've only got to put her name in and read the things that people have said. She was just a lovely person. She was great on a bike. I mean, her career was obviously short, but you know, national road race and time trial champion 2008 and 2012. She was a great teammate for all the riders who she rode with. But you know, just the cycling aside and her career, you know, as a person, she was absolutely lovely.
There's a lovely tribute to her, OJ, from Kristen Armstrong, the 3-time Olympic time trial champion, who said she found pure joy in sport and it was 100% contagious, which is a lovely thing to say, isn't it?
Bespoke
on 5 Live.
So let us talk about where we are, which is in a bike shop. Now, this is my LBS, my local bike shop, Ken Foster's in Chiltern, ever since I started riding bikes. And I am a newish convert to being a cyclist. For the 6 years I've come in here, they fixed my bike, and I bought bits and bobs from it. Rob, you've been a professional cyclist. The local bike shop in your world must have been a lifeline to you in the different cities in this country you've lived in.
Most definitely. I mean, back then when I started, if you weren't buying things from your local bike shop, you know, going in and actually walking out with the product, then you know there was no internet back then. So it was mail order. You know, it was the back of Cycling Weekly and looking at the adverts in there. But the local bike shop to me is something that is absolutely huge. You know, in the day of the internet, yeah, you can buy loads of stuff on the internet. Is it better value? I don't know. It can certainly be cheaper. But as someone has already mentioned, you know, I think some of the feedback we've had, Google, it cannot fit your bottom bracket. It cannot straighten your rear hanger. It cannot build the bike for you. You know, and I know of a lot of people who will buy a complete bike off the internet, and then they will go and try and get their local bike shop to set it up for them.
Now, I put this out on Twitter, actually, just to see people's experiences, the local bike shop to then. Stuart Baker says Dave Rayner cycles in Garforth, has a Watt bike upstairs for setup, cup of tea downstairs, and if they can, they will get you anything you ask for. Graham and Richard tend to know you by name. Craig Pickersgill says the internet is very faceless and nothing that could beat the LBS. We need your bottom bracket shell retapped. Lord Nonsense says his local bike shop, which is Ian at Ewood Cycles, complete understanding of all levels of cyclists and their individual needs. My last ride developed several manufacturing problems, all of which were painlessly sorted. If I'd bought it over the net, I'd now be hundreds out of pocket. Pedal On in Tadley says, I've got no name on this, the standout for me is their advice is free and good, and out of that they won't sell me something I don't need even when I've gone in there to buy it. And they have a lovely cup of tea. And lots of people saying the smell of the local bike shop is something that they always remember, not from just right now, but from being a kid. That smell of grease and tea.
Did you not love going to bike shops when you were a kid? First of all, you'd wander around and there'd be these gleaming machines that you'd either be desperately saving up for your pocket money or hoping that Father Christmas might deliver for you. And I think for a lot of cycling fans, people who love cycling, that love of the bike shop has never gone. And on that point about what the internet can bring compared to your local bike shop, yeah, you can probably get a much cheaper bike online. But in the same way as you'd never buy, or you probably wouldn't buy a suit online, having never tried it on, of all the products that you buy in your life, the bike is the one that you want to make sure fits. If you save yourself 400 quid, but you're never comfortable on that bike and you get sore knees and a sore back or a stiff neck, and you will put that bike away.
We're talking about bike shops here just as a way of buying things. Has there been a community role for bike shops over the years?
Yeah, and increasingly that's the way that local bike shops are trying to keep going and expand their business, isn't it? So they'll have cafes in them so that people can stop off at the end of a ride. They'll do shop rides on a Saturday or a Sunday, and they can act, particularly the ones that specialise in mountain biking, can give you a lot of advice about local trails, about the conditions of the trails and things like that. And that's all that personal, warm stuff that you can't get off the internet, that you can't necessarily get off forums. The place where I bought my last mountain bike, And it was probably 5 years since my last mountain bike, and I was really looking forward to getting it. And I had 2 or 3 bikes in mind, and I could have got them cheaper elsewhere. But at the place where I got it from, I test rode the bike for a couple of hours. I changed a few bits and bobs on it. They were fine with that. It got its first service there, obviously, as part of the package. It had a few other bits and bobs, and every time I go back to that trail centre and I see the guys, they're asking how it is, and they'll give me little bits. I'll tell you what, you want to do this to it now. It was fantastic. If I'd bought it cheaper online, I wouldn't have got any of that. It has made the whole experience of buying that bike, and more importantly, riding that bike, much, much better.
This is a good point to bring in Sean, who runs Ken Foster's here in Sean. Ken, I called you Ken immediately.
So,
Do you know, when I first came to the shop, I thought you were Ken.
Well, I'm a lot more handsome.
Who is Ken Foster?
He's the son of Eric Foster, who bought this place in 1954. He's semi-retired now, pops in every now and again. But, you know, he's been involved in this business since, you know, early 60s when he was 10, 11. He's done his bit.
Give us the history of this shop.
It was a pre-war cycle shop. Ken's dad and granddad bought it in 1954. It started off as a hardware and cycle shop. Went into selling cycles round about kind of all the way from the 50s, 60s. Motorcycles and mopeds in the 60s. Big motorcycle gain in the 70s, 80s, 90s. Motorcycling tailed off, so we ended up going back into the cycle side of it, and now we're just 100% cycling.
And what is it like running a cycle shop in an internet age?
It's tough. I mean, we've got a lot to... I mean, we could quite easily kind of put ourselves on an industrial estate somewhere and just be faceless. But I mean, we've got a lot of, you know, rates, you know, rent. You know, the cost of running the business is pretty phenomenal, really. If I'd like to take a point on what you were chatting about before, our biggest kind of problem we have from a cycle shop is it's called the showroom effect.
Is this showrooming where people come in and look at bikes and then buy it online?
So they get all the advice off you, and then you know, a couple of weeks later, you know, they'll purchase a bike online. So they've kind of got the advice that they need. And
do you know when that's happening? Can you sense that? Are you prickly about it?
Yeah, I mean, you can kind of get an idea if somebody's showroom, because the kind of rapport you have between somebody kind of tails off a little bit. But it's inevitable. It's part of life. We've got to kind of reinvent ourselves and talk to people and explain that, you know, the benefits of, like you guys were saying, you know, we'll be there for you. You know, we're open 7 days a week. You know, if you turn up at 5 to 6 on a Friday and you're racing on a Saturday and you need a spoke putting in your back wheel or truing up, Keith, my main man, he'll be here till 7 o'clock sorting your bike out for you. You know, that's just kind of your local bike shop.
So it's a very personal thing in that respect.
Yeah, and you do become, I mean, you become friends with people as well, you know. I mean, it's not just that, I mean, we've got to run a business, but, you know, you do kind of become friends with your customers, and you're happy that they're into cycling, and you want to hear about the stories. They might have started off in Chorlton and ended up in the Alps, you know what I mean?
Don't take this the wrong way. You do seem like an analog man in a digital world. Has the internet has the internet dragged you kicking and streaming, having to change how the business has worked?
Well, in a way, yeah, but I'm lucky because I'm surrounded by younger people, so they've kind of dragged me kicking and screaming. But yeah, I mean, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, it's all this modern stuff that I'm kind of a little bit alien to. I mean, like Rob was saying about mail order, I remember mail order. You know, you opened a magazine and that was I wouldn't even say it was a worry at the time. You just had people that did mail order and cycle shops, but the internet, it's a lot slicker.
I love how you came to be here, because you were only supposed to be here for a year, weren't you? How long ago was that?
1984.
What happened?
Just I was coming here just to make some money so I could go down to London and start a band, and with a couple of friends of mine.
What sort of band?
Jazz, funk at the time. It was kind of in. So yeah, that was it. I was a percussionist, and yeah, I was there for a year, but it kind of stayed.
Early 80s Bez.
Yeah.
I love that. So what role? I mean, you obviously speak to other people who run bike shops, because they are disappearing from the high street. Bike shops are disappearing.
Yeah.
What do they say to you when they close up shop? What do they say to you?
Well, there's a few reasons. I mean, some of them are family-owned businesses, and the children who are probably now in their 30s and 40s, they don't want to carry on the business, and it is difficult for people to, you know, walk into a cycle shop and think you're going to make fortunes. Some of the, as Rob was saying before, some of the shops are quite new to it from the 2014 kind of, as we called it, the wiggle effect, and what's happened now is we've gone into a real kind of decline. recession, as you'd say it, and these shops haven't been able to survive really. But,
I always thought that there were quite a lot of people who seemed to open up thinking that they could make a quick buck. Yeah. But I always had the feeling that the good bike shops that have been around for a long time would survive. Is that the case, or have there been some really good, just thinking of the workshop really, and the way that the interface between kind of the shop owners and the people who work in them and their customer base?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the traditional shops like ourselves, and I mean, if you want to quote another shop that's been around quite a bit, Harry Hall's in Manchester, I think you've just got to kind of just constantly reinvent yourself. I mean, our workshop's busier now than it's ever been. We've took on another mechanic this year. I've got one mechanic that's working part-time. Saying about people buying stuff online and bringing it in and asking you to fit it, we're going to have to embrace that, because 9 times out of 10 they bought the wrong part anyway, so you end up kind of fitting the right part for them. So I mean, it works for us.
How much does it upset you that happens now? I mean, because the problem is you can embrace it, and you can embrace it willfully, or you can sort of embrace it when it annoys you and you wish things were like they were.
It really has stopped, and it doesn't annoy us. You've got to live with it, and you've got to move with it, or you'll just... It's like anything. If you've got a grudge against someone, the only person that's kind of suffering is you, because you're retaining that grudge. That other person doesn't care. So, I mean, I look at any customer that comes in with a part in their hand that wants it fit is a potential customer. If I can re-educate them and just say, listen, support us. I mean, we'll never be as cheap as the internet. We're never going to be as cheap as some of the big players. And if you chat to people and you say, well, give us a chance, we'll try and price match if we can. If we're not, we'll get close to it. 9 times out of 10 people are fairly reasonable, and they understand you're running a business, so they'll kind of give you a little bit more than money, and we'll give them a bit more service, you know what I mean? Yeah.
Okay, next 5 years, what happens, do you think?
I get older.
You start that jazz funk band?
No, that's not going to happen. Arthritis in my hands, I can't play the congas like I used to. No, just next 5 years, we've just got to keep kind of reinventing ourselves. And if we do the job right, and if we give good customer service, we'll be still here in another 15, 20, 30 years. Might not be me behind the counter line, but...
Who wins in a race between Harry Hall and Ken Foster?
What, on a bike?
Yeah.
Well, probably me. I'm still competitive.
Cheers, Sean. Appreciate your time, mate. So let's do Christmas presents then. Here in the back of Ken Foster's, let's do Christmas presents for each other. We did this a couple of years on Bespoke. We thought we'd do it again.
Did we confirm we were doing this?
Yeah.
We did. As you walked out of my house last week, we confirmed this.
Oh dear. Who am I?
You better give me something that you own. That jacket's nice.
Do you want this jacket?
My little boy will fit in that.
Okay. Literally,
my 8-year-old lad will fit in that.
Literally going to take the shirt off my back.
Have you bought anything?
No.
Okay, have you bought something?
Yeah.
Right, then you're out of Christmas.
Oh,
so it's just me. What? We've got 2 presents. So I'm not going to give you a present and not get anything, and neither's Rob.
I've been a really good boy this year. I thought Father Christmas was going to come.
Oh, just crawl back under that rock from where you once came from.
Yeah, you slithering. So I'll get mine first, for Rob.
It's very small.
Yes.
What was the budget?
Tenner. Tell you what. He's wrapped it. All right. Wear those. So as Tom puts on a pair of antlers, Christmas antlers, he looks fabulous. You've wrapped yours.
Hang on. Look, I've managed to find a gift. Quite late on.
Okay.
So are we going to pass to the left like we do with ports, or are we going to pass to the right?
Let's pass to the left. First, Rob can go first and talk us through his present.
Well, you have to. Well, I bought you something, but the decoration, it's kind of a double whammy. I know. I thought about actually giving you the label as the present, because although it's not a cycling gift in as much, it has been made with love. But it's also it's the technology that's gone into it, which is also fairly Formula One cycling.
Hang on a second. Have you made me a tag out? Is that a carbon reindeer?
It's a carbon fibre
and
copper reindeer. Now the coppers, there's not a lot of copper obviously in cycling, but there's a fair bit of carbon fibre these days.
This is brilliant. I'm into this. Okay. Oh, we open this. This is from Rob to me. It is. Some Epsom salts.
It's basically.
Does this make you lose weight?
Only with a TUE. It's bath salts. Now, there's a lot of talk about the best way to recover. Ice baths. What a load of rubbish. Basically, it's nutrition, sleep, but have a warm bath with some of those salts to get yourself. Don't worry about the ice bath. It's a load of hocus pocus. It's black magic. Not a hot bath, a warm bath.
Okay, be honest with me. Did you have this in the cupboard at home? Or did you go out and buy it?
I can't believe he's made you a reindeer out in his workshop.
That is lovely. The carbon fibre reindeer.
No, that was what I did, and then basically Vicky at home, my wife, said, "Why don't you give him some of these?" She probably got them as a present for herself. I don't know, and has passed them on.
Mate, they're great. I'm really excited by those. That is a really good Christmas present, and I can't wait to do something with my carbon fibre reindeer. I'm now going to wrap mine.
Shall I give Rob the present that Sean has very kindly just given me?
Yeah.
Have you just wrapped your present in the paper that I've taken
that's
off?
Still better.
Oh
still
my
better
God,
than
you
not having wrapped a present until we've
it's
bought one.
wrapped in a
Happy Christmas,
700C Presta 18 to 23 millimeter in a tube.
I saw your letter to Santa.
Yeah. For the man who never rides his bike anymore. Yeah.
OJ, what could this be? What are you giving me here?
Okay, here you go. This is to you, Tom, even though you didn't buy anything for
Beautifully
anyone else.
wrapped, or should I say scrunched in the paper that Rob gave you earlier.
Okay. Now this
has come from Copenhagen, isn't it?
It has come from Copenhagen. So I spent the weekend there, which may
Is it
I
reindeer
say,
food?
No, it's not. As a city, Copenhagen is fabulous. You know, Chris Boardman this week was talking about trying to get, was it 1.5 billion pounds he's trying to get from Manchester?
Yeah, no, I think he found it under the sofa.
He's
going to donate it.
Well, from his own pockets, but he's talking about 1.5 billion pounds to turn Manchester into the forerunner of being able to cycle urbanly in this country. And if he manages to do it, and it's anything like Copenhagen, which is just the best cycling city, there's bike paths everywhere, everyone cycles, even though it's
get
snowing.
taken to school in the little weird little boxes in the front of bikes, don't they?
No, people wear helmets, and if you want to wear a helmet, that's fine, but the whole idea is that you get wherever you go by cycling. Now, I was told when we went to Torvenhallen, which is a food market, I went in there, this is glug, or glog as it's written. It's basically mulled wine. Now, I know mulled wine is a bit passé. It's very passé. We've done mulled wine for years in this country. If you go to any Christmas market, that is the best mulled wine I've ever had, and they insist you have a cup after you finish riding anywhere. You mix it with red wine and beer. I've got the instructions in my bag.
Together.
And beer as well. It's a bit weird.
But you're not mixing red wine and beer in the same saucepan.
Yeah, you are. All in the same. Let me get you the instructions.
So on the packet it says Rod Glog, who sounds like he was a Danish track cyclist in about 1976.
He does sound like a 6-day rider.
Yeah.
So basically, if you have that and a nice warm soak in your Epsom salts, that is the ultimate.
What you don't want to do is get the two mixed up. So you put a load of Epsom salts in your mulled wine and then put Rod Glog in the bath with you.
So half a bag of Glog spices, 1 Pilsner beer, sugar or honey, bottle of red wine, 1 to 2 DL of raisins. What's that? Donkey labels, and then 50 grams of almonds, skin off, roughly chopped.
That is a Danish party right there.
I tell you what, after you've been out on your mountain bike or your cross bike or your road bike, have a cup of that. Christmas is sorted.
Do you get if you drink this Rod Glog, do you get beer gloggles at the end of it?
There you go.
Bespoke
on 5 Live.
So sat squatting next to us during the whole of this podcast has been a watt bike, which an easy description is it's a very clever exercise bike. It tells you how hard you're working, how quickly you're going, and you can do timed efforts. And in the shop, they've had a 1K challenge. How fast can you ride 1,000 metres? Board up, and there's some pretty serious times on it. And we thought, why not work out which of Tom, Rob, or I is the best at a kilo? That's 1,000 metres, flat out. Someone gonna vomit.
God! That's over.
Oh, that was awful! Oh. Okay, none of us feeling particularly well after doing that. There's been a fair amount of time that's gone past. It's time to find out in reverse order. Sean's going to tell us now how we did in the 1K challenge.
With a time of 1 minute 15.67 seconds, Mr. Rob Hales.
He came third!
We've been a world champion! Second position with a stunning time of 1 minute 12.76 seconds. I'll have to apologise for this, is Tom.
What have we done? What have we done?
First position with a very impressive time of 1 minute 12.07 seconds, Mr. OJ Wallace.
Yes! Fix! Shut up, I went first!
Ramsey?
No, absolutely not. Well, there you go. Another Bespoke Weekly is done, and that 1K challenge has ruined everyone. Rob doesn't know what's hit him. Tom is just gutted he lost. And our engineer, the other Tom, he's upstairs being sick. He's gone the colour of his white T-shirt. Can't believe I won. If you want to see any of that, you can do via the 5 Live Sport Twitter page right now. You can find it on InShort as well. And that's us done. Another Bespoke Weekly is in the bag. We'll be back next week with a review of 2017 on the road, on the mud, and going downhill. For me right now, I'm going to go home and refuel. And celebrate.
BBC 5 Live. BBC 5 Live.
Hello and welcome to Bespoke Weekly. This week is a review of 2017. We're talking about cycling highlights and the lowlights.
Zwift is on the left-hand side of the road in your picture. Zwift is sprinting for the world title. It's Alexander Kristoff who's going for it now. And through the middle of the road, this is going to be such an incredible finish. As they crossed the line neck and neck, Sagan was going for it. They threw the bikes at the line. Could well be a photo finish there. What a sprint between Alexander Kristoff. I think Sagan's done it. I think it's a three-peat for Peter Sagan. To the Velodrome Stadium comes Roman Bardet. The crowd roar. Bardet's got 50 metres to go. Here he comes to the line. 30 minutes and 18 seconds. Roman Bardet, and Froome crosses the line right behind him. Boos all around in Marseille. The crowd didn't like it, but Chris Froome certainly has shown again he's the strongest rider in this Tour de France. It was a superb ride by Chris Froome at the end here, and he almost caught Roman Bardet. There is no doubt here in Marseille, with 24 hours remaining in the Tour de France, Chris Froome is set to win it for the 4th time.
Got some news just in regarding cycling's governing body, the UCI. They've asked Team Sky to explain why Tour de France champion Chris Froome returned a urine test that breached the WADA threshold at this year's Vuelta a España, which he won. Froome's sample revealed a concentration of salbutamol, which exceeded the WADA threshold.
So here we are, another year has ended. Rob Hales, Tom Fordyce are with me, and we're going to talk about what we think have been the highlights and the lowlights of another fabulous year of people being on 2 wheels, sometimes 1, sometimes 3. And let's start off with your personal thoughts. If we're going to go with the joy of cycling, which is what we call this podcast, Rob, we're going to go with the joy of cycling. How has 2017 been for the joy of cycling?
Oh, I think on the whole it's been a fairly standard year, hasn't it? It's, you know, for me, it's all about the bike racing. You know, gone are the days, long gone are the days where I used to race, and I'm now on the other side of the fence talking about it. I just love going to bike races and watching, commentating, whether it's track, road, on-road, off-road. I just love it. So in that respect, every year is a great year for cycling.
For you, Tom, though, you don't commentate, you never race. Where for you is the joy of cycling? Has 2017 been a bumper one for it?
I'll talk about the doing part of it, shall I, OJ? So I think, for me, the highlight, I had one of those amazing rides that you get sometimes out in the Lake District, up something called the Walner Scar, which is this brutal, brutal climb. And it was one of those epic rides where you've eaten all your food halfway through, you've opened the jelly babies too early, they've gone. You're sort of.
This is a highlight or a low light?
Oh,
You've gone to your low light
This is
already?
a massive highlight.
Which rolls into a low light, and then back to a highlight again.
But one of those epic rides where you push yourself much harder than you thought you would have done. You see some incredible things. You do some of those wonderful descents when you end up sort of shaking with adrenaline, and then you finish it in a pub, drinking Lakeland ales, eating fish and chips. Beautiful.
That's a highlight, yeah.
It is. If I look back at this year, for me, it's about all of it. It's about being at the Tour de France. It's about racing cyclocross. It's about commuting on my bike. For me, this year, through all of it, it seems like the first year it's just been a year for riding bikes. It doesn't seem to have been any massive drama. There has been, I'm sure there has been, but for me personally, it just feels like it's been a year of riding bikes without any of that, the big fandangos about drivers and bikes or anything like that. It's just been a great year for being on the bike.
Have you not been on social media at all?
I've ignored social media totally because I know it's still going on, but it just feels like it's the first year where it's been accepted. Yes, there's still some people who'll be vocal against cyclists, especially on the roads, but I think for the first time ever, it's just happening. I feel we are turning into a nation of cyclists. Q tweets to me, that it's not. So the way we're going to work this out is we're going to go through the seasons. Now, as a year starts in January, let us start with the big thing that tends to happen in that month. It's cold, it's dark, it's wet, it's muddy, which Tom Fordyce means cyclocross indeed, which I haven't had as much racing this year as I would have liked. You personally?
Yeah, I did a fair amount then to work gets in the way with the Autumn Internationals. I start going off to cover rugby and I can't do the
blame your job for
Can't
this.
do the local races. We did one of the muddiest races of all time though, didn't we?
We
do you remember that?
It was
staggering
awful.
through these swamps with our bikes on our backs.
Mm-hmm.
It was horrific at the time, and then about 20 minutes later you start enjoying it. About an hour after you feel like a hero.
Yeah, I turned up just as you left and you were in tears walking out. There was a clay pit. Yeah, there was a clay pit you had to stagger through. I actually got my best result of the year, Rob, which was I came in the, I think I came 40 out of 61, which for me, I mean, that was podium level.
That's not bad. And I think one of my early memories of this year, or it might even actually been the very back end of 2016, was at a cyclocross in Macclesfield.
It was, you were there. At a Supercross.
I was the Max Supercross, and OJ, well, we heard you before we saw you.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we saw you, we had plenty of time.
We did.
Plenty of time to abuse you as you were trying to run up a hill.
He
with
had
a
a lot
bike.
of people who were friends from the cycling industry were stood on a hill, the worst part of the course, the worst part, at the top of a hill, at a jump. I'm struggling up with my bike on my back, swearing and slipping, and there he is stood there going, come on, OJ, come on, try a bit harder.
Stick a mile on.
So let's talk about the World Championships, which happened this year in January in Luxembourg. It was a very interesting World Championships for lots of reasons. The men's elites was won by Wout van Aert. Sana Kant won the elite women's. Brilliantly, the women's under 23 was won by Anne-Marie Wurst, the Dutch rider. What a great name to actually win a category. But it was the men's youth race, which was the most interesting from a British perspective.
It was actually the junior, the World Championships, Tom Pidcock. If you haven't heard of Tom Pidcock, you soon will, very much so. Incredible ride. It's actually one of my highlights of the year, which comes off one of the lowest lows I've ever had. January 21st, Charlie Craig died. A very good friend of Tom and the squad. 1 week later, it was actually January the 28th that the junior race happened, and that took place. GB, clean sweep. Gold, silver and bronze. Tom Pidcock took the gold, Dan Tullett the silver, and then it was young Ben Turner who took the bronze, all with their black armbands on. And unfortunately I wasn't commentating on that race, but I know for the guys who were, it was quite an emotional day. And the lads rode out. They went out and they rode for Charlie, and they took the 1, 2, 3. So yeah, low light, but a very big highlight, and certainly kind of the start of kind of the journey for Tom Pidcock in at world level riding.
For people who don't follow cyclocross, how big is it that Great Britain had 3 riders winning the junior race?
It's unprecedented. I mean, it's basically, cyclocross is the national sport of kind of the Dutch and the Belgians, really. But for Great Britain, I mean, we've Roger Hammond, now a Team Dimension Data rider. He was junior world champion way back. But it doesn't happen. It's not a sport that we've really performed at the highest level. Certainly not a performance like this. To get the clean sweep was absolutely incredible.
Tom Pidcock and the rest of the riders, obviously they wore the black armbands. Charlie Craig, who'd passed away, was a friend of theirs, was a teammate of theirs. How much did they talk about using that as motivation in that race?
I would have thought that was, very high on their priority. It's one of those things, to perform at your best. Obviously, you need the physical ability. You need to have the form there, but a hugely important factor in performance and getting the best out of yourself is in your head. It's the psychological side. Sometimes you can perform above where you're physically able to if you've got that mental strength, and other times you can really underperform, and a lot of the time that you get underperformance isn't necessarily, it's not all to do with the physical side of it. It could very well be the mental side. So I'm sure on that day that all 3 of them, the entire squad, rode out there with even more motivation than normal.
Now, as we move out of winter, we start looking at spring. The big thing in cycling, especially on the road, is the spring classics. I was late to the spring classics of what they meant. They are such fabulous races, aren't they? Brilliant one-day races.
Chips, mayonnaise, beer with massive foaming head on it, mud, dust, cold biting
enjoy a cup of tea.
riders getting blown off by crosswinds, mad old blokes in cafes obsessed with it. It is a very strange part of cycling, but it is a wonderful part of cycling.
You look at the people who won this year, and you look at the names who won the spring classics. What for you is the best spring classic?
Yeah, I think for me the big one is Paris-Roubaix. It's the one I remember as a child. You know, there were two things. There was the Tour de France, because that was on everybody's telly. You didn't need to look far to find it. But also Paris-Roubaix, I can remember watching that as with my dad. So that's the ultimate one. But this year I was there, and I was very fortunate to have been commentating on Tour of Flanders, and Philippe Gilbert, who took out that victory. I don't know if people remember it, but it was possibly going to go Sagan's way. He was in a good move. He was chasing, and he had that big crash.
He met jacket.
Yeah, took the jacket, and poor old Sagan a little bit too close to the barriers. He made a habit of it during the year, but very riding up alongside the barriers, jacket hit his handlebars, and that was it. Took himself out, and a couple of riders with him.
What I want to know is, what about the jacket? Has anyone looked into how the jacket is? After multi-millionaire Peter Sagan tried to ruin a spectator's jacket.
I imagine it's never been worn again. It's probably framed on the wall of some cafe somewhere, isn't it?
The jacket.
With a rip on prominent display.
Check eBay quickly. Now, if we look at some of the other spring classics, Greg van Avermaet, I mean, what an early season he had. Pronounce it for me. E3... Harelbeke, of course. Ghent-Wevelgem and Paris-Roubaix.
Omloop as well.
Pardon?
The Omloop as
Did
well.
Omloop as well.
Yeah.
What an amazing spring Greg van Avermaet had,
Well,
the
he
BMC
had
rider.
an amazing sort of 8 months as well, because don't forget he won the Olympic road race title in Rio when everyone else was clattering off on that final descent. And he has got that classic build for a classics rider, OJ. He's the sort of weight that makes people at home who ride their bikes feel better about their own weight, because they look at his height, he's about 5'11", I think, and I think he weighs about 75 kilograms, which is a reasonable amount for an ordinary bloke, isn't it? None of this sort of, hang on, 64 kilograms for a grown man. And he rides in a wonderfully aggressive way. He's Belgian. There's almost no better rider to be winning those sorts of races.
Now, we've made a big thing about this being about the highs and lows of 2017 on two wheels. And Mike Hall, who is one of the biggest names in endurance cycling, he was killed whilst riding in the Indian Pacific wheel race. He was hit and killed by a car in Canberra. Ironically, this was after he had tweeted out complaints about how close the cars were passing him. It was such a sad moment, especially as he's the founder of the Transcontinental. If you don't know about the Transcontinental race, an annual self-supported ultra-distance race across Europe, 4,200 kilometres. The winners take 7 to 10 days. Everyone else takes much longer. Twitter, Instagram was filled with stories of people on this race, sleeping on park benches, eating whatever they could just to make it to the end. And I think a lot of them did it in the name of Mike Hall.
First and foremost, he was an amazing rider. If you look at his achievements, if you look what he did in that field of ultra-distance racing, he was absolutely phenomenal. But he was also one of those enthusiasts, as you say. You know, he put races on. He organised little races in his home area of Wales as well. Just that real love of cycling and love of particular niche of cycling. And it was a very, very sad day, 31st of March. He was so far through that race as well. I think they have to ride about 5,500 kilometres, and he was less than 500 kilometres from the end. And it hit that branch of the sport very, very hard.
Which brings us into May in the Giro d'Italia, the big 3-week Grand Tour, the first of 2017. 3 weeks around Italy, won by Tom Dumoulin. It was a fabulous race.
It was a great race, and the fact that Tom Dumoulin went through and...
How do you explain this? Go on.
Yeah, it was a great race, and the fact that Tom Dumoulin was able to hold on to the end of the race. Unfortunately, didn't quite hold on to the end of one of the stages, but that's a completely different story. But no, the fact that he was able to take out the victory, you know, the amount of attacks that he had on him, the riders trying to get that jersey off his back in the final few stages, they just weren't able to do it. So an amazing victory by a guy who his first Grand Tour stage win, possibly not his last, but his time trialing ability is obviously without doubt, but his multi-day stage race, his 3-week stage racing really is coming on.
And it wasn't the only drama of the Giro d'Italia. I mean, Tommy D stopping to answer the call of nature. Geraint Thomas, who was looking good at the time, he was taken out totally.
Said he was in the form of his life, yeah, and he was finally given the chance to lead Sky's team at a Grand Tour. And it's a familiar story, unfortunately. Now it's a repeating story that there was a crash involving one of the race motorbikes, and G was one of the unfortunate riders to go down. Struggled on for a few days. I think he popped his shoulder and also sustained knee injuries, and after 2 more days he had to pull out. As we'll get to later in our review of the year, things were to improve for him come July, but at the time it was devastating for him, absolutely devastating.
Yeah, the team that was on the climber blockhouse, stage 7 I think, when all the riders on the left hand side of the road, they just negotiated a right hand bend, so coming out obviously you're on the left hand side of the road, and all of a sudden from the helicopter shot there was a police motorbike parked up on the left hand side of the road. You never do that, with a right hand bend. Obviously you park on the right hand side of the road because that's where all the riders will be over on the left. Absolutely catastrophic for Geraint and the entire team, and something that should never happen. But as you said, Geraint in the form of his life. I spoke to him a few days before, and on some of the tougher stages he was just, it was like water off a duck's back. He really was starting to find his form, and actually I think it was the day after in the 2 days after in the time trial, then he was second behind the Moulin, and everyone thought, he's back, he's okay, but alas, it was then I think the following day or 2 days after, that was it, game over for him.
Which brings us into June, and for me it's one of the highlights of the year. Now this is going to start off not sounding like a highlight, because it was in June of 2017 that Rachel Atherton finally lost a downhill World Cup race. And you think that sounds ridiculous. The reason she lost it is she had dislocated her shoulder in the warm-up. That's the only reason she lost the race. And that was the end of her winning World Cup races back-to-back for 2 years. She was undefeated for 2 years. And the reason it's a bit of a highlight is it just goes to show what a brilliant rider Rachel Atherton is, to the point where I think she has a legitimate claim that over the past few years to be Great Britain's most successful rider.
She's been absolutely amazing, hasn't she? I mean, they're kind of a brand, aren't they, the Athertons? And yeah, it does show the ability that she's got, and I think they're a brand, aren't they, the Athertons, with 2 brothers, and for it to take an injury like that, for her not to win, just goes to show where she's at and the stature that she's got in the sport, and very underrated, I think, outside of the sport, certainly.
Which brings us firmly into summer now. It's July, which means what, Tom? C'est le Tour de France. 3 on the bounce for Chris Froome, 4 in total. And of course, we're talking about this as a retrospective from the year when we know what's happened with Chris Froome and what happened at the Vuelta, which we'll get on to. But let's talk about that Tour de France on its own as it was at the time and everything we talked about then. What for you, Rob, was the highlight of the 2017 Tour de France?
The highlight was probably not having to share a room with you.
Which happened in 2016. I had to wake him up for Radio 4 breakfast.
I'll give you a couple of other highlights as well. I mean, let's not forget that on the first day of the tour, we had another Briton in yellow, didn't we? Geraint Thomas making up for the horrible disappointment of the Giro by going to yellow in Dusseldorf in that 14-kilometre time trial. Interestingly, inspired by the British and Irish Lions, he'd watched the second test against the All Blacks in the morning, and the Lions had come from behind to win 24-21, I think. All that adrenaline still going through his system, went out and surprised everyone. Here's another one as well, another highlight from that tour. Stage 7, Marcel Kittel, who obviously filled his boots in the absence of Sagan and of Cavendish, beating Edward Boasson-Hagen by 6 millimetres. 6 millimetres.
It was great, that, wasn't it? The day when nobody knew who'd won, and they were showing the pictures repeatedly. Who's won? No one could call it.
Bosenhagen, bless it. He was so
thought he
close,
had it,
wasn't
didn't
he? So close. And, his sprinting's come on, and the irony, when he finally got a stage, he was away on his own.
For me, my highlight is, well, there's two actually. One is where Rob Hales and the rest of his team, Simon Brotherton and your producer Gemma, they left early from Dusseldorf because they wanted to get there. They had argued. No, you stayed behind. They stayed behind in Dusseldorf because they didn't want to drive that night. So they'd argued with the BBC to get another hotel. And then on the way the next day, had got lost. And it took you how long to make it to the next stage?
Well,
because you followed Google Maps.
No, we drove the route. We thought, right, we'll pick up the route out of Dusseldorf. And so we did. And we asked a guy, and we could see barriers over the other side, but anyway, the guy said, no, you've got to follow the route, go this way, and blah, de blah. Anyway, we followed the route, and we did this big 30-odd K loop, and then we came back to the spot, and we waved at the same guy. And the barriers that we saw over on the left, it was like a figure of eight. It came back on itself, so we'd done this massive loop, so we saw the opening loop, which we never even got to commentate anyway, because, well, it was a nightmare.
That's one of my highlights. My other highlight is Rigoberto Urán, the rider for Cannondale, ex of Team Sky, who I think is a fabulous rider. I think he's much maligned, not really focused on anymore. He did indeed, but it was the stage where he rode as a hipster on a single speed bike. There was a stage where he won a sprint, his gears had broken, so he did it in a single gear. He big ringed it to the finish.
He did, yeah. It was, his rear mech derailleur wasn't working after that horrendous crash that took Dan Martin and, alas, Richie Port. Richie Port out of the race completely. Dan Martin didn't do him any favours, certainly for where general classification was. And yeah, on the run-in, neutral service came alongside, couldn't help him other than Rigoberto saying, just pull the rear derailleur across and leave me in top gear. And the flip side is, if they hadn't have done that, he possibly wouldn't have won the stage. But the fact that he had no option, just ride, nothing else to think about, just brute force up that finish straight, and he took the win. Yeah, it was a big day for Rigoberto.
Another thing for you, OJ, from July, talking about mountain biking, let's not forget Annie Last, who won the World Cup race in Lenzerheide, the first British woman in 20 years to win a round of the World Cup. Annie's been a great rider. She's been to 2 Olympic Games, but that was absolutely the peak of her career so far.
And that brings us beautifully into August, and Nino Schurter. Who's Nino Schurter?
Nino Schurter is probably the greatest bike rider that most people haven't heard of. Olympic champion at cross-country mountain biking. He won every single round of the cross-country World Cup this year and the World Championships. He won the Cape Epic as well, which is an extraordinary race down in South Africa. If you want to know how good he is, go onto YouTube and put in Nino Schurter training, and you will see it's not a Rocky style montage, it's the opposite. He's almost like, there's a lot of balance work in there, there's a lot of quite mystic stuff. Try and do a few bits at home. You can look at what he does and try and copy it, but be prepared to walk around like John Wayne 3 days later, because it destroys your legs.
You attempted it?
Yeah, I've tried a few bits. There's one bit where...
Hence why he walks like John Wayne.
Yeah, I've always walked like John Wayne. There's one bit where he's leaning back and he's supporting himself on a wobble board, basically. Imagine like top of a skateboard on a metal cylinder, so give him loads of instability. And then he's got his feet on 2 disc weights, the sort of thing you stick on an Olympic bar, and then he pulls his legs in like that, again and again and again. It looks really easy. You do it at home, and I thought, tell you what, every time you do any exercise, it hurts. So I'll just start off. I'll do 3 sets of 8 with 2 little 5 kilogram weights, and it destroyed me. Absolutely destroyed me. I'm still not an Olympic champion, but I like to think I'm slightly faster.
Well, if I'm hearing Spanish music, that means it's time for the 3rd Grand Tour of the year, the final Grand Tour, the Vuelta a España. Chris Froome won it. So, Tom, your highlights of the Vuelta this year?
My personal highlight was arriving for the final few days.
You stole my job.
I thought you were unavailable.
I wasn't available. I didn't want to make it sound like you were second chance. I didn't want to make it sound like that. Yeah, I couldn't make it. I was off doing esports. But you were there. What was it like? I was gutted, actually.
Right,
I didn't want to go.
We know the race is going to finish up the Angleroo on the Saturday, this fearsome climb There's basically this paved goat track that goes up the side of a mountain. So when me and the producer land at the airport and we go to pick up our hire car, you know you're going to be driving up it, so you're thinking, well, maybe something with a little bit of poke, with a little bit of grunt. And then you turn the corner and you see Postman Pat's van. This red van, which was hard enough just driving back to the hotel. And then we're going up this road, and obviously people are cycling up the Angler Route beforehand, they're walking up it, and I'm in first gear all the way, like that, and it hasn't even got a big manly horn, it's like a little pathetic, like that, so I'm being mocked. There's smoke coming out the engine, the tyres are spinning. There's a couple of ramps on the Angler Route, fearsome ramps where it goes sort of 25%. And there was one where I was flooring it, and I got halfway up and some bloke stepped out in the road in front of me, so I had to stop, and then I had to roll all the way back down the ramp, annoying the people who I'd already annoyed passing them as I came back through.
A Grand Tour working in the media, it's so much easier being a bike rider.
Away from your travails of driving Postman Pat vans up it, it was a fabulous stage at Angliru, not just for the fact that Chris Froome really won the Vuelta there, but the fact that Alberto Contador, who's had a checkered career, but has always been exciting to watch, it was an amazing way for him to end his career on the Angliru, the way he attacked and the way he held on to take that stage, because he'd struggled the rest of the Vuelta.
It was almost like because this is his last year, he was determined to go out in style. Remember what he was like at Paris-Nice, where he only lost to Sergio Henao by 2 seconds, didn't he, after that extraordinary performance on the final day. He had targeted the Angler all the way through, and the support was enormous for him. There were no asterisks in the mind of the Spanish public that day. There were no caveats about his doping ban. It was, and certainly in Madrid the next day on the Ramblas, they were welcoming home a hero.
When you talk about the physical ability of a rider, but coupled with the mental strength, if you've got that motivation, this is the last hurrah, this is my final race in front of a home crowd, incredible.
Well, the shadows are lengthening. We've headed now fully into autumn and September, and it's off to Norway, and we've tried to choose some Norwegian music from a Norwegian band, and this is what we got. Yep, that's the Norwegian band we chose, Aha, Take On Me. What is the reason that we are in Norway, Rob?
The World Championships.
Indeed, they were held in Bergen in Norway. Tom Dumoulin, he won the time trial. Annemiek van Vleuten, she won the women's time trial. Chantal Blaak won the women's road race. Sagan, he won the men's road race, the first rider ever in history of the bicycle to win 3 in a row. And while we're on who won what, Sunweb won the men's and women's team time trials. It was a great World Championships.
The crowds were fantastic, weren't they? Absolutely phenomenal. I mean, Bergen really, really embraced it. On Sagan, he'd had a disappointing year until that point, obviously with his travails at the Tour. He also did something else amazing that year, which won't get him in the cycling record books. Have you seen that clip of him wheeling up a mountain in the Tour of California?
Have you seen him doing the box splits in the gym, which is even more ridiculous? It's like
he's the rider who can pretty much do everything, isn't he?
Yeah, he's quite a machine, isn't he? On and off the bike. There's a few videos out there. He does a few spoof. Did he do Grease a couple of years ago?
He turned up at a party as well with his girlfriend, dressed as a lord, like a. Did you ever see it? Where
he looked like Willy Wonka.
He did, with a cane and the trousers and the jacket on. I mean, he's amazing. But for him to win 3 World Championships on the bounce on all those different courses as well just proves what a great rider he is.
Yeah, and I mean, there's even talk the amount of people that have said, you know what, the course, as hard as it is next year, and they say it won't stop him. I don't know. I beg to differ, but well, you wouldn't put it past him at all. I mean, we hadn't seen him all race. I mean, during commentary, I was trying not to mention the fact, is he still, because we didn't know. I mean, you would hope that if he had got dropped, the cameras would have been on him, but you can never guarantee it. And then it was literally 2 bends to go, and all of a sudden he's there. He popped up. He just hidden the whole race, the entire race, and then came out when it counted. Poor old Christoph, local man, took it out long, and you thought, is he going to hang on? Is he going to hang on? Slight downhill finish, and well, Sagan photo finish.
This is going to be such an incredible finish as they crossed the line neck and neck. Sagan was going for it. They threw the bikes at the line. Could well be a photo finish there. What a sprint between Alexander Kristoff. I think Sagan's done it. I think it's a 3
Which pretty much brings us to the end of this review of 2017. Of course, there'll be lots we missed. The world of cycling is massive, and we only have the time we have for this podcast. But I think we should look at who were the best riders in our eyes of this year, of these 12 months. So let's go with the women's rider first. Tom, who do you think was the best women's rider in 2017?
OJ, I'm going to go for Anna van der Breggen for winning all 3 of the Ardennes Classics. That, to me, is a superhuman performance.
Who are you going to go for, Rob?
I'm going to go for world champion in the team time trial. She also won the Women's Tour of Flanders, Ride London, and Alfredo Binda, and got a couple of seconds and thirds as well. In fact, she was second in the Tour of Yorkshire, and that's the Sunweb rider, Corinne Rivera.
See, my choice is for somebody, she didn't win tons this year, she won a bit, and that's Annemiek van Vleuten, mainly because she had that horrific crash in the Olympics in 2016 in Rio. Chris Boardman, Simon Brotherton were commentating on it. The crash happened, and I remember thinking, have I just witnessed somebody die on TV in a bike race? It was one of those moments, and they immediately, the broadcasting, whoever was broadcasting, cut away quickly, and I was like, oh my God, and no one mentioned it. They never mentioned it again.
Well, it was extremely difficult in commentary, actually, because she'd gone down, she kind of went over, and the soles of her feet literally hit herself on the back of the head. And then the camera cut away, and then you saw the second group coming through, because she was off. It looked like she was going to take the victory. She was on her own. The next group came through, and as the camera went past, she was still on the side of the road, and she hadn't moved. And it was at that point where we thought, oh, and we were very subdued. We were aware that we had to continue with the commentary on what was an exciting finish to a race, but also with being mindful of, are we going to have to deal with something, worst case scenario? As it turned out, we didn't, fortunately, but at the time, it was, extremely difficult.
So for me, after that crash, when she was so horrific, the fact she got back on her bike, she raced through the end of 2016, the fact she got over that adversity, and in 2017 showed such class. She took the women's time trial at the World Championships. For me, that ability to come back and be that strong and that brilliant after a crash, which some people would never get back on a bike again, for me makes her my rider of the year. Good shout. Which brings us on to the men's rider. Rob, you can go first this time. Who was your men's rider of 2017?
It's a tough one, isn't it? With so many performances out there by so many riders, and I think I'm going to choose A, because he's British, and B, because I think he is going to be such a big star. It's got to be Tom Pidcock. We've already mentioned him, World Junior Cyclocross champion. He then won the time trial at the Worlds, the under-23 time trial championships, and some of the events that he has ridden with elites in the UK on their own ground in some of the televised Criterium series. He's an amazing talent, and I'd like to think that he's got a good group of people around him. I know his father's very integral to his performances, and he's going to need looking after, and it's one of the reasons why I was actually glad he didn't back the time trial championships up with the road race a few days later. I thought that might have been a little bit too much too early. As it was, he rode for his team. But yeah, just look out for this guy. He's coming big time.
Who's yours, Tom?
I'm going to give an honourable mention to Thomas de Gent, the king of the Doom breakaway. He rode 40 stages in Grand Tours this year. Was in a breakaway on 15 of them. Isn't that wonderful? And on the very last of them, at the Welter, he actually stuck. He pulled it off. Isn't that wonderful? I mean, look, most of us would be giving up at 10, 11. And Thomas again thought, I might just one more time. One more time.
He was such hard done by as well at the Tour de France, because the most combative award didn't go to him, and I know, it went to Barguil.
Funny that, a Frenchman winning on
there
the
we go.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, Barguil was on the podium anyway with the polka dot jersey, but yeah, I know there was public outroar with that one, but yeah.
So honourable mention for him. This time a week ago, I probably would have said Chris Froome, only the third man in history to win the Tour and the Vuelta in the same year, first Briton to win the Vuelta. After what we've heard last year, I'm going to suspend judgment on that one until we find out what really went on, or due diligence is done, until due process is served. So in the interim, I'm going to go for Greg van Avermaet for his extraordinary performances across the spring.
I think they are all great choices. A little bit like you, Chris Froome was on my list, but obviously beautifully put. Well, due diligence is done for what happened in the Vuelta. I think we have to suspend any plaudits there. I was also going to go for Tom Pidcock just by the fact he's an amazing young rider and he is winning cyclocross races, road races, and time trials.
It's just his strength in depth, yeah.
Show off. But I was also thinking about Craig Evans. He was the man who won the Red Bull Hardline this year. If you've ever seen that race, it's the most ridiculous downhill mountain bike race ever. The man who puts it on, Dan Atherton, builds the track. He builds a track which is insanity. They call it the hardest track in the world. Anyone who can win that race, for me, has to be one of the riders of the year. But my choice is for Tom Dumoulin. For getting off his bike, answering a call of nature, getting back on, and still winning a Grand Tour under all of that pressure, he wins my Man of the Year. And that wraps up this Bespoke Weekly, this review of 2017. Thank you so much to Rob Hales.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much to Tom Fordyce. Let us know your choices on anything we've spoken about here. Maybe who was your male and female rider of the year? At 5Live Sport is the Twitter handle. You can get all of us on our personal Twitter account as well. It's been great. We'll see you in 2018, which is next week.
BBC 5 Live.
I lead you out. So
Are
I'm
you
not
suggesting
behind
that
you.
I'm going to have wind?
Yes, I think I am.
Well, there we go for another ride. Thanks for tuning in if you have. That was a muscle force workout. But listening to a couple good podcasts from Bespoke Weekly from the BBC. A group of three guys talk about cycling. And can't be any more enjoyable than that. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you soon.